Hi everyone. My name is Dave. I'm a security architect. Today I'm going to present uh, on a topic related to identity and access management. Um, the title of the topic is Issues with Multiple Identity Systems on Premise and on Cloud. And how did we solve it with Azure AD? Before I go deep into this session, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Dave. I'm a director and principal security architect at a C4 Canadian Cyber Solutions based out in Canada, Toronto. I'm a security architect and consultant for last 14 years. I'm also founder of a cyber initiative called Cyber Security Malayalam, which is a YouTube channel and a Facebook page in Malayalam aimed at educating my community. I've worked with retail companies, financial institutions, mostly on security transformations. So, little deep into the session. Before I go deep into identity and access management, this is actually a case study of identity and access management at a big retail company. Retail company in the sense, this is much similar to Reliance Retail or Big Bazaar in India, but at a larger scale. We had a lot of more users, a lot of internal users, 2 lakh internal users. That's a big number. We had 8,000 stores. We had 1.5 crore customers, more than 100 internal applications. The daily hiring was close to 500. So busy HR department. We had a 1,000 plus member IT team and almost 50,000 servers to support all these applications. It was a huge, very large retail company, probably second biggest retail in the whole world. This is from a real story. This is from a real use case. This is one of the toughest problem I have solved in my 13 years of IT career. So if you look at today's scenario, a lot of companies are moving to cloud. A lot of companies are skipping on-premises data centers and directly moving into cloud. For bigger companies, identity and access management is a big problem. And even for the smaller companies, this is an issue. So how to solve this issue? So I'm going to present this use case with the help of a couple of diagrams that will provide more clarity into what we were doing and how we solved the real issues. So, getting into the first slide, life before cloud. If you look at this diagram, this is a simple representation of the architecture we had at that company. So, it contains all the identity and access management systems. It contains applications. It contains the set of users. Internal users, partners, customers, etc. Let us first talk about the employee hiring flow. Typically, HR is the one who hires and fires you. They use systems like Workday or Talio to hire an employee. Once the employee is hired, they basically send an email to IT help desk asking them, create this user in the Active Directory. In most of the companies we see, they're sending plain emails instead of automation. So once IT help desk receives this email, what they do is they provision the identity into Active Directory. Once that Active Directory identity provisioning is over, they then create application access. These are all done using emails. So think of the scenario where there are like 500 employees coming in or changing every day. A lot of email traffic, correct? So in this company, we had multiple identity and access management systems. So the IT help desk, before creating the identity into Active Directory, used an identity and access management system called CA, Computer Associates Identity Manager. Then we had multiple Active Directory LDS. This is an older technology. Most of you have seen this in older environments. Lightweight directory structure. Lightweight directory structure is usually used when you need custom attributes for applications that are not really supported by Active Directory. In this ecosystem, we also have partners. When we go into any company, we have multiple contractors coming from other organizations. We have business partners. Some of them may need to access our internal applications also. So in this case, we need to provide access to them. So this was also handled using the IT help desk. So similar to the initial process flow, IT help desk will create an Active Directory ID using CA Identity Manager. Usually with CA Identity Manager, we see a single sign-on product like CA Siteminder. For web applications, this gives the single sign-on experience. We also have customers. If you go to any company, any retail company, you have a lot of customers. So in many companies, the identity access management system for the customers is separate. They don't really want to bring all the customer identities into the Active Directory because that's a lot of load for the Active Directory. It becomes very difficult to manage the Active Directory also. So they are usually coming up with a separate identity access management system. If you look at this landscape is very complex. You can count at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 identity and access management systems. That's a lot of management overhead. IT admins, identity admins, they're all busy all the time. So let's look at what are the problems in this architecture with multiple identity and access management systems. There are too many manual processes. As I said earlier, all the processes are done using email. HR is sending email. The business partner is sending email. So there are lots of emails going back and forth. So for somebody sitting in IT help desk, it is very difficult to keep a track. HR has to wait at least 7 or 8 days to get an AD account, Active Directory account created, and provision apps for a user. That's a lot of process inefficiency. Manual provisioning to other systems, like this is mostly about application access, like SAP. You have other multiple applications in the company. So you have to provision identities to the systems manually. Multiple lightweight directory structure. This again is a management overhead. You don't really get a true single sign-on experience. Let's go into any company. How many companies provide a true single sign-on experience? What do you mean by single sign-on? You log in to your device once. After that, you click icon of any application or you go into any web application. You will be auto-authenticated. You don't need to do any steps. You just click the application and you will be signed in based on your existing login or existing session. That is what you mean by single sign-on. In this architecture, which I showed you a while ago, there is no true single sign-on experience. That means the users are impacted. Again, implementing additional security features like multi-factor authentication, that's impossible with this scenario. You can always add something like an RSA token or something. But to integrate that within the landscape, that's very difficult. So there is something called identity crisis, which is running in every big and small organizations. That's the reason for a lot of inefficiency in terms of identity and integration. So whatever I showed you, this was in the company around 2015. By the time we reached 2016, 2017, then came Office 365. So with the introduction of Office 365, like Outlook Online, Word Online, PowerPoint Online, we needed Azure Active Directory. So as like every other company, we extended Active Directory to Azure AD using ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services. Normally, any company will do that. They never go into any other technology. They will prefer the easiest technology to adopt, that is ADFS, and sync the identities to the cloud to support a cloud platform like Office 365. This was a time when many companies started adopting SaaS tools, software as a service tools. So all this software as a service tools needs a cloud identity, and that cannot be provided by a normal Active Directory on premise. So they went forward with Azure Active Directory. You know what was the result? We got one more identity and access management system to manage. No process change, only the addition of the ADFS servers. But in a large environment, you need multiple ADFS servers and web application proxy to support the identity extension to Azure AD. And Azure AD was simply providing SAML tokens to all these SaaS services. So in this situation, we hired more admins to manage the new infrastructure. Life became more complicated. The moment you add new applications or new infrastructure, that then administration becomes more difficult. We thought the situation will improve, but no luck. Situation wasn't improving. Then came cloud. Cloud, by cloud, I mean all the infrastructure as a cloud services. If you look at the diagram, that diagram is a bit more complex than the previous slide. To the bottom right, you can see three other clouds: Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud. If you look at a big enterprise, they don't just go with one cloud because not all their applications are supported on one cloud. They adopt multiple cloud platforms. In our case, we had applications running on all the three cloud platforms. All the Windows infrastructure went to Azure. There were a couple of applications running on Amazon, like Snowflake and things like that. We had our digital team working on Google Cloud because everything as a code was initially supported by only by Google Cloud. Now it's supported by all the clouds, but Google Cloud had a lot of more support to digital transformation. And in the effect, like the landscape became more complex. So this is the case with 90% of companies I work with. You have multiple clouds in the scenario. It's a purely hybrid multi-cloud. You have multiple SaaS clouds, and in some cases you can also see PaaS services. Say for example, SQL Server. That's a PaaS service. So managing all of that with multiple identity and access management systems is very difficult. And if you look at the provisioning even became more complex. So all this led to more administrative overhead. We later realized we cannot really survive with this kind of administrative overhead and multiple identity and access management systems. The physical perimeter was changing. Think of an era where we had on-premise servers. All of them were secured using Active Directory and firewalls. What I mean by firewalls is the perimeter firewalls. If you go to any old enterprise, the two major security technologies that we had was Active Directory number one, and number two is the firewalls. The perimeter firewalls, Cisco's, checkpoints, Palo Alto's, they were all protecting the perimeter. They were safeguarding us from attacks from the internet. And you typically see security zones like demilitarized zones and internal server segments in this architecture. But if you go to cloud, such an architecture doesn't really exist. We don't have anything like a solid perimeter in any cloud. What is a new perimeter? The simple answer to that question is identity is the new perimeter. Identity is the foundation of the cloud. We all think virtual machines are the foundation of the cloud. I don't disagree. Virtual machines really provide the platform, the foundation for which we can deploy apps quickly onto the cloud. But the actual perimeter is identity. Many companies many new professionals really don't realize that. Number two, if you have a lot of manual processes, you will never win on cloud. You need to go with a lot of automation. You need to scale up and scale down resources. When the customer demand for an application increases, you need to scale up. The customer demand for an application decreases, you need to scale down. That is what you mean by agility on cloud. So for your applications to scale up and scale down, you need to have that scale up and scale down supported by all the backend systems, especially by systems like identity. And going to cloud without the scale up or scale down or without DevOps is as good as like on premise. If you don't do this and go to cloud, your company will be in failure. You'll be spending a lot of money on cloud, but you need to get that agility. So our strategy to move to cloud and to establish cloud and to take advantage of rapid scale up and scale down was by automating as much as we can. Instead of all the manual processes, we try to automate. Number two, we want to centralize and capitalize on one identity and access management system. If you look at the older slides, we have multiple identity and access management systems. That became unmanageable. Now we thought of centralizing and capitalizing on one. Let's use this as a centralized identity system. Let's build all the workflows on that same system. Let's add more security features on that same system, like multi-factor authentication. If you go back 10 years, you would have never seen multi-factor authentication. You just had a username and password to log in. Now, with current set of security risks, you always need new technologies to secure your identities. The best control you can adopt in this scenario is multi-factor authentication. Now, we use a lot of APIs in the current scenario. To secure them, we need OAuth and OpenID Connect. So you really need a proper identity and access management system in the backend to support the OIDC and OAuth tokens. The approach we took was we pulled out all the low-risk systems and increased the security of them, and we followed a phased approach. I will describe the phased approach in the coming slides. In this picture, I'm basically showing how we started the modernization. If you look or take a close watch at the previous slide and compare it to the previous slide, you will see all the CA infrastructure got replaced by a technology called ServiceNow. ServiceNow is used by a lot of companies today, which is a very powerful ticketing tool, which has the capability to provision identities. Everything is based on tickets. Everything is based on queues. ServiceNow has got multiple APIs to connect with Active Directory, and in some cases, it has the power to connect with Azure AD. It has power to communicate with AD LDS. You can also run custom PowerShell scripts if you would like to in ServiceNow. You can automate a lot. So multiple systems can be brought down by using ServiceNow. ServiceNow implementation is not very easy task. It takes some time. It needs proper support from implementation partners. It is well documented. It is adopted by larger companies and smaller companies these days. It has got multiple workflows which are pre-built. So by adopting ServiceNow, we killed a lot of manual processes. The help desk which was there, that's killed by ServiceNow. The identity and access management system, the CA identity manager, was killed by ServiceNow. But all the applications which now dependent on AD goes back to AD, and some applications we pointed to Azure AD. That's actually shown in the next slide. There is no change made to the customer identity and access management. It's too early to make changes. We don't have a proper identity system to support them right now. Even the partners, they used to create tickets. If they need an ID in the system or if they need an application access, they used to come back to ServiceNow and create a ticket. ServiceNow is a SaaS tool. Workday is also a SaaS tool. So it's a cloud to cloud integration. They integrate very well. If you look at all the new evolving SaaS cloud tools like Salesforce or Workday or ServiceNow, they provide easy connectors to integrate with each other. It's a SaaS to SaaS integration. You don't need to worry what's happening. All you need is to open up the ports for them to communicate with your internal resources, whitelist them, and install a SSL or TLS certificate to make sure there is encrypted communication. Workday and ServiceNow contain a lot of sensitive information. They also provide the functionality to encrypt the data in rest and transit. So we went with automation. There are multiple other competitive products to do the automation, but the reason for selecting ServiceNow was it was very easy to adopt. There are most of the flows are already mapped there, and we replace all the manual with ServiceNow. And sorry, I forgot to tell you, the ServiceNow implementation took 5 months. In bigger organizations, it may take more time to properly implement ServiceNow, test the workflows, and make all the workflows exposed to the users. As I said before, we repointed apps to Azure AD. We already had Azure AD, but we were not utilizing it properly. So we repointed apps to Azure AD. We also repointed logins from Windows 10 devices to Azure AD. We reduced actually the load on Active Directory. Active Directory is on-prem. So for a user who is trying to use a cloud app, doesn't need to come to Active Directory. What is the reason to come? There is no particular reason to come to Active Directory. Azure AD, on the other hand, is available globally. You can directly contact Azure AD to get your identity token. From Windows 10, all the systems by and large support Azure AD. So Azure AD was used more frequently, more properly in the landscape. The same functionality given by Azure AD to all the clouds, that remains same. We never touched it. If you compare this to the previous diagrams, this is more efficient architecture. With this slide, we actually started the security modernization. If you look at this slide, this is not different from the previous slide a lot, but we added security features to the bottom left of the slide. What is security feature? Azure AD by and large supports conditional access. Your access is checked for multiple conditions before your access is granted. Where are you coming from? What is your IP? What is your device? What time you are trying to log in? Where are you? You can match a lot of conditions before giving access. This actually provides a lot of security. So how many of your apps are actually supporting this kind of security features? Very few apps supports this kind of features. But with Azure AD and Azure AD based integrated authentication, we can bring in a lot of security to your internal applications. So the major security features that we used was multi-factor authentication and conditional access. Usually this comes together, bundled. So to get the most security, you will need to combine both of this together. We also provided a feature called self-service password reset to the users. The users can reset the passwords without contacting an IT admin or logging in a ticket. They can go into a SSPR portal and they can enter in a set of questions and then they can reset the passwords. So multi-factor authentication and SSPR also works together. So you need to basically have multi-factor authentication enabled to provide SSPR. For users, this is a great experience. You can reset your passwords from any part of the world at any point of time. You don't need a support from a third party. You're basically in charge of your own account. And in MFA, you have multiple options to receive the multi-factor authentication tokens. You can receive a SMS, you can get a call from Microsoft. You can also use the Authenticator app. Personally, I prefer the Authenticator app because that's the most secure way of getting a multi-factor token. Also, I haven't shown this in the picture, but we moved from ADFS infrastructure to password hash synchronization. We are basically taking the passwords from Active Directory and putting it to Azure AD after multiple rounds of hashing and salting. This is the recommended approach by Microsoft these days. There is also a feature called PTA, pass-through authentication, for companies who are not really comfortable to store their passwords salted and hashed in Azure AD. That option is called PTA or pass-through authentication. But we went with password hash synchronization, which is the most efficient way of synchronizing passwords and identities. So with this, we were able to decommission all the ADFS infrastructure. We only need AD Connect, which is very simple to manage. And we also tried to add more or use more features from Azure AD called Azure AD PIM, Privileged Identity Management, for our clouds. So all this was added to Azure AD. So if you look at this slide is much more simpler from the initial slide we started with. This slide is even more simple. If you look at this slide, what is a change? The change basically is we actually used Azure AD to provide identity and access management to customers and partners. Customers were coming in using Azure B2C, business to customer, and partners were using a feature called B2B. We slowly migrated all the users from the customer identity and access management system to Azure AD. The partners were using their own licenses and they were directly coming into Azure AD. So all the identity and access management systems in the landscape was collapsed into Azure AD. This reduced a lot of administrative overhead. This reduced a lot of complexity in the landscape. And primarily all the admins in the landscape were managing the Azure AD only. This brought in a lot of standardization. This provided a lot of convenience for the users, and even for partners, we rolled out SSPR so that they are able to read their passwords. They don't need any administrative support or help desk support. And also, we provided features like MFA. Right now, Azure AD supports MFA for B2B and B2C. So you don't need to develop a third-party custom system to provide multi-factor authentication or OTPs to the customers or partners or internal users. So the migration took us around 6 months. We did the migration in phases. We never approached it in one phase. We used multiple small steps to get into this target state. Getting into the next slide. Every app through Office 365 and Azure App Proxy. What I mean by this is, you don't need to go into separate application icons to access an applications. Most of the applications can be delivered as a tile in Office 365. All you need is to log in into Office 365, and onto the landing page there are multiple tiles or icons. So most uh, popular applications are there already. You don't need to do any custom work to add these applications. All you need is to integrate these applications with Azure AD and configure these icons to be on the Office 365 landing page. So once you log into Office 365, from there you get a true single sign-on. With this, we could eliminate VPN for a lot many users. Previously, all the users had VPN installed on their laptops. Right now, in this scenario, they don't need VPNs. So we were able to decommission a lot of VPN appliances from the landscape. And the user experience was much, much more better. Only the system administrators had the VPN because they need to log in physically into the servers. So they needed VPN. This was actually done before the COVID times also. Right now, how many of you have VPN installed on your laptop? Do you actually need it with such a setup? My answer to that is you don't need VPN unless and until you are a system administrator. So all your applications delivered either through the Office 365 landing page or using Azure App Proxy. Azure App Proxy basically is used to expose applications similar to a Citrix way of exposing applications. It's basically targeted at exposing all the legacy applications to the web. So you can go into the web and go into older applications. Those are for applications which doesn't really have a web front end. So the Office 365 landing page and Azure App Proxy, that's a very good combination. I always encourage companies to adopt App Proxy. App Proxy is very easy to configure and very easy to expose it to the user using the web technologies. And in the backend, all the identities to App Proxy or Office 365 is managed through Azure AD. So the last slide, if you compare the first slide, the very first slide and the last slide which I showed you, we can see very few systems in the landscape. That means administration overhead is reduced. We have a single identity and access management system called Azure AD. Active Directory on-prem is basically used as a entry point into Azure AD. You need both of this infrastructure to support legacy environments and legacy on-prem infrastructure and legacy on-prem support for routers and switches and things like that. Those cannot be really integrated with Azure AD. So you need AD and Azure AD. So the learning of this 18 months of security transformation is, number one, identity is key in any cloud or digital transformation. To identify a user and to provide all the resources based on their identity, you need a strong identity and access management system. Number two is IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. That means cloud is the future. We are going into a no code, cloud oriented app delivery mode. To properly harness all the functionality or all the features of this environment, we need strong identities. The third point which I wanted to make is identity is the issue in most of the companies. If you look at the small, medium, or large industries, anywhere in the world, identity is a problem. That applies true for all the North American companies or European companies or the Asian companies. Even look at your company. How much of administrative overhead is behind identities? Without identities, you won't be able to properly authenticate and authorize user. You cannot really understand what a user is entitled for and what the privilege is. The next point is Multiple identity systems can create operational overheads and security issues. If you're using an old identity system like AD, bringing in security features like multi-factor authentication is next to impossible. So we have to plan and we have to bring in the new identity and access management systems to keep in pace with the security changes. The other point which I want to make is please use your existing frameworks. Do not bring in a new system which is really new to the landscape if you have a system which has got similar functionality. I see people bringing in technologies like Okta or Ping Federate for identity when they have Azure AD. Why don't you use your Azure AD to your fullest? Use all the features, and if you don't have a feature within Azure AD or the technology that you have, then buy another tool. Many companies repeat these mistakes. The problem is you're basically getting one more tool to manage, which is a lot of overhead. Azure AD, to my experience and to my knowledge, is simply great. It's very powerful, very simple to use, very easy to deploy because you don't technically need any deployment. It's there already. Everything is pre-configured. You don't need a lot of customization. You all need is to basically bring in AD Connect or some other technology to sync your identities from on-premise to Azure AD. And for smaller companies, you don't even need AD. You can just survive with Azure AD. So in this process, the organization I consulted for, we almost saved $30 million. Provisioning was reduced to 4 hours. Previously, it was around 8 days to provision an identity and give access to an application. That got reduced to 4 hours with this state-of-the-art automation. So the cost savings is very large, $30 million. That's a lot of money. And it took 18 months to get there. I'm almost coming to end of the session with this slide. I don't know how many of you have seen this slide. This is actually a Microsoft provided resource called Secure Modern Enterprise. I love this framework, very simple framework, which basically looks like a house. I'll go more into the framework. For anybody who wants to modernize their infrastructure and modernize their security, this framework is very useful. Let's approach this framework first from bottom to top. If you look at the bottom, basically it says secure the platform. Whatever platform you get, secure that first. If you're adopting a already secured platform like Azure, you don't need to worry about it. So on your secure platform, start building your security foundation. What do you mean by security foundation? You need all those basic security controls to secure your apps, the web application firewalls, all the other technologies, your IPS, the intrusion prevention system, your IDS, intrusion detection system, your firewalls. Right? Those are the critical attack defenses, your endpoint security. If you look at the Microsoft cybersecurity reference architecture, I don't really have a link to this. This is one of the best resources that you can get from the Microsoft website, the Microsoft cybersecurity reference architecture. If you look at the architecture, there are only very few capabilities that are not available on Azure. Number one is next generation firewall. Unfortunately, Microsoft doesn't have a next generation firewall. So they're given provisions to add your Cisco or Palo Alto or Checkpoint to Azure. You can bootstrap using a marketplace image, and you can easily fix the critical attack defenses. Endpoint security. We already have endpoint security on Microsoft. We have Defender. We have all the DLP capabilities. So those are the critical attack defenses. On top of that, you build the identity foundation. So all my previous slides basically refer to the building of identity foundation. You need to have a very strong identity foundation. On top of that, we have 4 pillars. Number 1, identity. We talked a lot about identity. Now we talk about apps and data. From a previous presentation, we saw Power Apps. Right? So we need to basically build the pillars on top of a secure foundation. So number 2, the pillar is apps and data. We have infrastructure and we have devices. If you secure all these 4, you are securing the enterprise fully. You are getting almost 360-degree security in the whole enterprise. Now, if you look at the roof part of this diagram, the top part of the diagram, you see secure modern enterprise. So you basically have 3 components in the foundation and 4 pillars. With these 3 components, I believe I would say 2 components, because Microsoft Azure as a platform is already secured. All you need is to care about 2 layers in the foundation and 4 pillars. And a lot of this can be realized by native technologies. You don't need to even buy a third-party technology. You can survive. You can do a fair, good job with all the existing technologies in the Azure or Microsoft landscape. Approach this very slowly. Don't rush into it. Break your work into multiple steps. Slowly approach the transformation or transition, because if you rush into this, it may become a failure. There is enough and more documentation on secure modern enterprise on Microsoft website. Please refer them. And also you can refer to Microsoft cybersecurity reference architecture, which is my favorite. This is created by, I believe, Mark Simos from Microsoft, which clearly lists down what are the features available in Azure IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS around security. Recently, they have produced a slide on the Microsoft identity landscape also, which is very similar to Microsoft cybersecurity reference architecture, which is very useful. Always split your goals into 3. Immediate. That means what you need today, what you need tomorrow. Number 2 is short-term goals. Whatever you can realize in next 3 months or 6 months. Those are called short-term goals. And last is the long-term goals. What do you need to achieve in next 1 year or 2 years? Carefully strategize. Once you properly strategize, break it down into roadmaps. Once you do the road mapping exercise, split it into projects. That means you can track each and every project. And once you complete that project, it will get rolled up into a roadmap and it will get rolled up into a strategy. Typically, in a huge enterprise environment, the transformation takes about 2 or 3 years. You need to do a lot of planning. You need to sometimes course correct if something goes wrong. You need to have alternative strategies. You need to have multiple options. Some technologies that worked in a different company may not work in your company. So please understand that there can be failures, but then course correct. Move forward in a structured way. With this, I'm almost at the end of my presentation.